46. David, can you kick that air conditioner unit back there? I got this one supposed to be on, but it's not doing much.
I turned it down.
Okay. We've been studying about Joseph and all of his troubles and trials, and how God, it was only God's plan for him to go to Egypt and to save his people. How that through God allowing him to interpret Pharaoh's dreams, he became the next in line to Pharaoh, and everything that he said was law, just like if Pharaoh had said it. And in chapter 46, we find that Israel, or we would usually call him Jacob. God changed his name to Israel. He goes down to Egypt with his family. And in the beginning in verse 8, it starts to name the members of the family. And then it gets down to, let me find it here. Verse 27, it says, "And the sons of Joseph were born to him in Egypt were two. All the persons of the house of Jacob who came to Egypt were 70. Somebody read for me Acts chapter 7 and verse 14. You got that real quick? Anybody? Acts chapter 7, verse 14. Whoa. That says 75, doesn't it? No, it can't. I looked, I thought, well, because it names Joseph in the list of those who were already, but anyway, now this is the explanation, is that the speaker in Acts is reading from the Septuagint, which is the Greek version of the Old Testament, but the Hebrew version says 70. The Hebrew version, but it says, my commentary says the Septuagint names the other 5 people that this one doesn't name, but there were 5 more, and that's their explanation. And they said that's the reason Stephen quoted it was because that was the book they had had the Greek writing for about 2 centuries, and that's of the Old Testament, and that's the one they all read and knew what it said in. But the commentaries all said it because that the Septuagint added 5 more people that that didn't get counted in this first count. That was their explanation.
Does it name the 5?
I don't know. I didn't. They said it did, but that's just one they said it. I don't have the Septuagint, so I don't know. They didn't name the ones that in the explanation I found. But I looked it up on several different deals to find out what. I didn't know what the Septuagint really was. But that was their explanation. Is that in the Greek translation of it, they've added 5 more people that was not in here. One commentary says that this is probably not. They're just counting the guys, most of them, and the main wife. It's not counting the new children who have been born to these sons and what have you. And one estimate is that maybe there was as many as 200 all involved in all of it. That's what one commentary said.
Well, Exodus 1 and 5 says it was 70.
Exodus 1 and 5 says 72, okay. Like I said, but Stephen quotes 75. That's the reason. But that is the reason, because the translation he's reading says 75.
They said Joseph was already in Egypt.
Yeah, but there was only 4 of them.
Uh-huh.
So that'd only be 74. But anyway, there is a little bit of discrepancy here, I really can't explain it all about how they had the difference of the 5 different people. But they all come into the land of Egypt, and Joseph says, whenever you talk to Pharaoh, tell him that your occupation is you care for livestock. Because that it is an abomination to Egyptians to be a sheep herder or a person that takes care of cattle and sheep. And so that, yes, sir.
But later on, Pharaoh winds up with all of the Egyptians' cattle and sheep.
Yes.
And I wonder if that means the lowest social class of maybe the Egyptians even took care of livestock.
Well, you know, they would have had to have, because, if they, most all societies there were meat eaters, and so they would have, somebody would have to take care of the livestock.
But they were an abomination.
Yeah, so this is the lower class, would have been the ones that would take care of the
Arkansas.
He said that on live Facebook.
I didn't say that.
Well, it'd be kind of hard to explain that to Pharaoh, because they took all their livestock and their property that they acquired in Canaan with them.
Yeah,
I mean, they came bringing their own livestock.
yeah, they brought everything they had, and they had lots of stuff.
Yeah.
They had lots of stuff. And so, that's the thing is, now whether there was 70 men or 75 men, or that part, that, like I said, we got 2 different translations, 2 different readings on that.
I don't think the Egyptians liked shepherds. They didn't have sheep. They had most of the other kind. They had the cattle, they had the goat, the camels, and.
Okay, well, I think I'd rather have the sheep than the goats, but anyway,
Sheep.
excuse me, Brother Mr. Brown, but he likes goats, but I never found a goat that I keep where I want him.
Yeah.
He couldn't stay where I wanted him put, maybe he didn't have big enough fence. Well, we didn't have very much luck with sheep either, but anyhow, that's the way they are.
Well, it says that the shepherd, in verse 34, it says that every shepherd is loathsome
Yeah, they're loathsome, yeah.
to the Egyptians.
Yeah, they're loathsome to you. Yeah. So the Egyptians probably had some people that was taking care of their animals, but they were they were probably either slaves or they were a lower class of people. That's something you got to always remember in this day and time, that when it says servants, it probably should be translated slaves. And so, 2 of Jacob's wives were servants to his other 2 wives, and the 2 servants had no choice. They just, here's your husband, and you got to raise kids, so there was no choice. But up until 150 years or so, slavery was rampant in just about every society. 150 years may not be that long, may not be long enough now. I may be dating myself on that part. But anyway, nearly all societies they were a class type of society, and you had your rich people and your educated people, and then you had your business people, and you had the lower class. In England, they called them peasants. They weren't necessarily slaves, but they were peasants. They'd had to do all the nasty work, and there was not any room to move up. There was not any room to move up. Verse 29, it says, Joseph prepared his chariot and went to Goshen to meet his father Israel. It says, as soon as he appeared before him, he fell on his neck and wept on his neck a long time. Then Israel said to Joseph, now let me die, since I have seen your face, that you are still alive. Joseph said to his brothers and to his father's household, I will go up and tell Pharaoh, and will say to him, my brothers and my father's household who were in the land of Canaan have come to me, and the men are shepherds, for they have been keepers of livestock, and they have brought their flocks and their herds and all that they have. When Pharaoh calls you and says, what is your occupation? You shall say, your servants have been keepers of livestock from our youth, even unto now, both we and our fathers, that you may live in the land of Goshen, for every shepherd is loathsome to the Egyptians. And so the chapter 47, they settle in the land of Goshen. That used to be a saying you'd hear once in a while, lands of Goshen, you know, and I don't, but it was, Sally, she's old enough to remember people saying land. Some of you others are old enough too, but just not going to admit to it. But anyway, but they were in the land of Goshen. And then, so Joseph takes some of his brothers and takes them to meet Pharaoh and rehearses this. And then Joseph introduces Jacob to Pharaoh. And it says Jacob blesses Pharaoh. You know, Jacob is kind of like Abraham and Isaac was. They are men of God, and when their blessings, that when they bless someone, it seems to carry quite a bit of significance, and it seems to come true. But he blesses Pharaoh. Of course, Pharaoh has taken his son under and kept him alive and made him the prince of the land, and has also allowed them to live through this great famine. And Pharaoh says, verse 8, chapter 4, Pharaoh said to Jacob, how many years have you lived? So Jacob said, the years of my sojourning are 130. Few and unpleasant have been the years of my life, nor have they attained the years that my fathers lived during the days of their sojourning. And Jacob blessed Pharaoh and went out from his presence. And Jacob's had lots of stuff, but he's had lots of troubles and trials in his lifetime. Had to work 14 years to get his favorite wife, and him and his brothers had it out, and then they been playing favorites while he loses his favorite son, and for a while. But he says that the years of my travels are 130. Few and unpleasant have been the years of my life. And so anyway, as Leland pointed out, the famine gets worse. The people run out of any money, and so they trade their animals for grain. They trade their land for. Pretty soon, Pharaoh owns everything, and the people become what we would call today what kind of farmers? Sharecroppers. They become sharecroppers.
Does Pharaoh even own them?
Probably in the same way that I saw a deal last night about the old the coal mines from years and years ago, and the coal miners had to live in company houses and buy their food from the company store, and many times after working all week, they had went in the hole. And that's been the same. That's been so essentially. They weren't slaves, but they wasn't hardly no way to get out because they owed money.
Verse 19 of 47.
Yeah?
They say by us and our land.
Yeah, by us and our land. In other words, by us and our land.
And we will be in bondage to Pharaoh.
Well, yeah, they had nothing. They had nowhere place to go. And Pharaoh owned the land. He owned the cattle. He owned the sheep. He owned the.
So everything you got, whatever.
Yeah, you ain't got nothing else. So we're working for Pharaoh, whether you want to call them slaves or what. We're the only job in town is plowing this ground and working for Pharaoh.
I think that's talking about the Egyptians and not the.
Yeah, that's talking about the Egyptians, yes. But later on, we'll find that after Joseph has been gone for a long time, and this Pharaoh was gone for a long time, then because there are so many Israelites, they make slaves out of them. Verse 28, chapter 47 says, Jacob lived in the land of Egypt 17 years, so the length of Jacob's life was 147 years. When the time for Israel to die drew near, he called his son Joseph and said to him, Please, if I have found favor in your sight, place now your hand under my thigh and deal with me in kindness and faithfulness. Please do not bury me in Egypt. Don't bury me here. Take me back home. And they do. They buy him after he dies. He calls his sons to him and he talks to them and he just curls up and dies. He knows he's about to die. And after he dies, the Egyptian physicians, that's what he calls them, they embalm him in the way that they knew how to do. And you had to wait so many days for the embalming process to take effect, and then so many days for the mourning process, and then they all traveled back to Canaan to bury him where Abraham had bought the cave to be buried in. But they all went there. Even many of the people, many of the officials of Egypt went with them. Said it was a great company of people that went to take Jacob back, his body. And we'll find it Joseph basically makes the same request of his brothers. He said, God's going to come get all these people one of these days. And I know he is, because he's promised the Israelites this land in Canaan. And so when you leave, you don't leave me here. You take me with you. And if you'll watch and it's been a while since I watched them, if you'll watch the old movie, The Ten Commandments, and it's got some stuff that's not right in it, but when they leave, they've got a great big fancy coffin, and that's Joseph.
Hey,
They
Bruce,
get, do what?
maybe a off-the-wall type question.
Uh-oh.
I wonder why he cared. I mean, did they have the vision of going to heaven?
Yes.
Jesus and all of that, so they did have the vision of
Yeah.
going to heaven?
Yeah.
So
And-
they assumed they would arise from the dead one day?
Yeah, well, see, Jacob has seen had visions of angels, and he even wrestled with an angel one night. And
By what means did they do that?
huh?
By what means did they do that?
But just because they were able to talk with God. God
Okay.
talked with them personally, and sent angels to talk with them. And so they were convinced. And they made sacrifice.
Right, I read that part.
Yeah, they had their own religious services. This is, of course, this is before Moses, but still they worship God in the way that it's called the patriarchal age, because God talked to the head of the family
Right.
and told him, this is what y'all need to be doing.
Sins were rolled forward, weren't they?
Well, now that's under the Mosaical law. Yeah, that's after Moses God gives the law to Moses. But they're getting close to it. But anyway, but they do end up taking Joseph back. Also, it's several hundred years later, but they take his body, his coffin, if you will, back with them. Because remember, this is the land of the Egyptians, where today they have dug up, or in some of these pyramids and what have you, where the bodies are still pretty well intact because of their methods of embalming and the dry weather is there. If they were prepared in the right way, there wasn't much decay. And when you read in the New Testament, when you read about Jesus, they bury him, and then when Lazarus, they bury him, and some of it says they wrapped them up. They used the same kind. They had learned that from the Egyptians. They used some of the same procedures. This be several hundred years later. They still use some of the same procedures that the Egyptians used. Now this, we went from Genesis, the beginning, all the way down that we've gotten through Joseph. And we've seen God create the world. We've seen him create mankind. Mankind has fallen into ill repute, if you will, starting with Adam and Eve. They get so bad that it says that their thoughts were evil continually, and God destroys the world with the exception of Noah and his family. And then we go from there to Abraham, to Isaac, to Jacob. Joseph saves the family. What is all this preparing us for? It's preparing us for Jesus. God promises Abraham, says, through your seed, all the nations of the world will be blessed. God had a chosen nation out of Abraham. Not that they were any better than anybody else. In fact, we find that they were just as bad as everybody else on many occasions. But God chose them to give the oracles or the teachings. He also chose them through their lineage that a Messiah would come, which is Jesus. It's what makes this book so important. It's the beginning of the world, but it points us in the way to get us to where Christ is. Because that's what the whole God planned from the beginning of the world, that there'd be a Messiah. Because Adam and Eve had a choice, but then God knew what the choice they was going to make. That they was going to sin. And yet, he decided that, he says he repented him. That's the King James Version. Repented God that he made mankind. And so he says, I'm going to wipe them all out. But it says Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. Now, I don't know how many hundreds or thousands of people are on the earth at this time, but Noah's the only one's worth anything, I guess. God chooses him. It's through him that every nation that's on the earth today, every color of people, every size of people, we are all descendants. You want to go back to Adam? We're all descendants of Noah and his 3 sons. There are those who are very prejudiced, who want to say that when God put the mark on Cain, so nobody, that's whenever he made Cain into a black man. Well, that's where but they forget all I don't know what kind of mark God put on Cain, but it says that nobody, if they seen him, they know who he was. They wouldn't kill him. But that doesn't work because God wipes everybody out with the exception of Noah and his family. So we start all over again. So you just imagine all the different nationalities we have today in this world, and we're all kinfolks. But nobody wants to get along with each other. See? You don't look like me, so you're my enemy, you're not my friend. You know, that's kind of the way the world's been. Still is in many cases. Okay, we've talked about the beginning of the world, and we talked about God saving a portion of people to where Jesus comes through. So next Wednesday night, we're going to go to Matthew chapter 1. We're going to start with the person that this all points to, which talk about Jesus. So next Wednesday night we'll go to. You're in some first, second Thessalonians. Do say okay. So that's what I asked Jake, and that's what he said. So, so we're going to go to Matthew chapter 1. Yes, sir.
A lot of people used to tell me what they really don't believe in the Old Testament, but it was there for a purpose.
Yes.
In Genesis 3, Galatians 3, starting with 24, it says, "Wherefore the law was our schoolmaster to bring us to Christ."
Bring us to Christ. Yes.
So we might just be justified by faith.
Yeah.
So it did its job.
You did his job. Yes. Any questions? Yes, sir.
Have you any insight over in 47, verse 11? We're gonna settle over at Goshen, but it says the district of Ramsey.
Okay.
And then later there winds up being a king, Ramsey.
Yes.
Have you any insight on this Ramsey that's listed here as far as the district?
No.
I think there was more than one.
Is there more than one?
Ramesses, yeah.
More than one Ramesses? No,
Yeah, there was more than one Pharaoh named Ramsey.
Okay.
This says district.
District of Ramesses. Okay.
But I've got another question, just for your opinion.
Uh-oh.
The Egyptians wrote everything down.
Yes.
How could Joseph be forgotten?
Well, this was where Moses wrote this down.
I know, but it says that the Egyptians didn't know anything about Joseph.
Oh, later on. Okay, yes.
They had forgotten.
Well, I think what it means is that it's been so far back where it's kind of like, well, George Washington, he was 200-something years ago. He might have been all right, but, he doesn't, many people don't think that much about him today, and so that may be in what the case, well, that's so far back there that, like I say, everybody wrote everything down. But, 400-something years later, who was, we ain't worried about Joseph. We're worried about getting some slaves, because, some estimates, if you want to figure it, there's 1 million of them Israelites when they come out of there. I think it names about 600,000 men, the tribes. Now, I hadn't added up lately, so that's just a roundabout number. And then if most of them had a wife, and some of them had 2 wives, and then most of them had anywhere from 2 to 12 kids, then you could get to 1 million real fast. Over 1 million. And you say, well, there's just no way to get from 75 people to 400 years. It makes a lot of difference. You stop and look at the oldest ancestor that you could find back in, mine, his oldest one I know about was born in 1860 or 58 or somewhere in that neighborhood. And you start there and you just take all the kids they had and all the kids they had and all the kids they had and what have you, and you go from that couple right there to several hundred people. And just a couple lifetimes, you know.